will just be the presentation and not the questions. So that should have just popped up there. And I will just get started. So just as an FYI too, as I'm presenting this, I can't see everybody on screen, but we will come to questions at the end, and I'll let you know just when we're at the end of the presentation too. Perfect. So I'll just start by explaining a little bit about us. So we're the Highlands and Islands Climate Hub for those of us joining today that might not be aware of us. Again, I'll just go over a couple of housekeeping rules first before we begin. So we will be running through the presentation about the CLLD funding, but we're leaving plenty of time after to answer any questions you might have about the funding. So we are recording the session today, but we will turn the recording off when it comes to the questions. So if I can just ask everybody as well to keep your microphones on mute for the presentation today. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the Climate Hub first, before we get into the detail of the funding. So we're part of a network of climate hubs across Scotland, which are funded by the Scottish Government. There are currently 24 climate hubs across the whole of Scotland, and we cover the Highlands, Orkney and Shetland Council areas. So just on screen there, you can just see a map, and then highlighted in blue is the area that the hub covers. So just a little bit about our team. Of course, I should introduce myself. My name is Bethany Laurie, and I'm one of the Senior Project Officers at the Highlands and Islands Climate Hub. I work largely on the funding at the Climate Hub, and we're made up of a team that are based around the Highlands, Orkney and Shetland. So today we're going to be talking about the community-led local development funding on offer. We're keeping the presentation today fairly light touch, so we have plenty of time for questions about projects you might apply for. We'll be touching on some of the funding details, the key dates, the eligibility and the funding themes, a little bit about the application process, the assessment criteria, monitoring and evaluation, and a little look at the funding application form. So the CLLD funding is intended for giving communities the power to tackle their own challenges, responding to the needs of their local area and to support positive change by building knowledge, skills, supporting new ideas and encouraging cooperation. CLLD funding helps to create viable and resilient communities. So we're just going to go a little bit into the funding details now. So this funding is delivered on behalf of the Highland Council Community Regeneration Fund in partnership with Highland Third Sector Interface. The Climate Hub and Highland Third Sector Interface are delivering funding on different themes, so we'll talk a bit more about that shortly. The funding is for third sector organisations operating in Highland only, with some geographical exclusions. Grants are up to a maximum of £10,000 and applications do open tomorrow, the 8th of April, through both the Hub and HTSI. Projects will need to be completed by the end of December 2025, so this is funding that's intended for kind of roughly 6-month kind of projects. So just again, we are inviting applications for funding up to £10,000. The funding application form will first start with an eligibility check, which includes checking there's a bank account registered in the organisation's name and checking that you're able to provide a Fair Work First statement. The application won't allow you to progress if you select no to either of these. The amount of funding you request should be led by the proposed activities or project, including the full cost recovery. If you are claiming for overheads or management fees, they should be justifiable and reasonable and make sure they are not covered by existing core funding or any other funding. So please make sure that your organisation has everything in place to deliver the project or activities that you're proposing. If you are applying for a project or work on a building, you must be able to confirm ownership or a long-term lease agreement. So the funding does have some geographical exclusions, which I just mentioned, which are Inverness City and Badenoch and Strathspey. There is a map on our website and the HTSI website with the Inverness City boundary, which is excluded from the funding. The CLLD funding for Badenoch and Strathspey is delivered by the Cairngorms Trust, just in case anybody here is joining us from Badenoch and Strathspey today. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the funding themes that are on offer. So the funding themes for the Highlands and Islands Climate Hub are along the themes of resilient communities and sustainable communities. So for resilient communities, funding is intended for projects such as resilience, community planning, emergency resilience equipment, measures which address adaptation to climate change. So for example, this could be flooding, coastal erosion, and infrastructure to support community resilience. So you can think of projects that will address the impacts of extreme weather, the purchasing of inflatable sandbags if you're in an area prone to flooding. It could be community engagement around flood prevention, forming an action plan through community resilience. Also, the kind of projects that are applicable under this theme could be projects which address coastal erosion, such as more grass planting and kind of extensive community engagement around that. For the Sustainable Communities funding theme, it's intended for projects that address the just transition to net zero, circular economy, enhancing biodiversity, energy efficiency measures, and active travel. So this could be projects such as community composting facilities, repair cafes, or community gardens. It's not an entirely exhaustive list, just as long as it addresses the theme of sustainable communities. Another kind of example could be looking at a feasibility study to undertake energy efficiency improvements to a community building. There is also some more further and in-depth examples on our website, which my colleague Joan, I believe, is popping in the chat as well, if you wanted to look at those. I think some of you here are joining us that did join us through the HTSI session that was on Thursday last week. So just to briefly touch on the funding themes that HTSI are delivering on, these are enterprising and growing communities and inclusive and engaged communities. So for enterprising and growing communities, that is connectivity within and between communities, entrepreneurial activity and social enterprise, infrastructure that facilitates work such as childcare, employability, and then for the inclusive and engaged communities, that's tackling economic poverty, addressing economic or social inequality, creating inclusive spaces, enhancing understanding of diversity, engaging typically unengaged individuals. We are joined today by Marion at HTSI, so if there are any questions at the end about the funding themes from HTSI, I'm sure Marion can advise much better than I can as well. So just a little bit about the funding process now. So the full funded applications for the Hub and HTSI will open tomorrow, the 8th of April. The funded applications will be online and can be accessed through both the Hub website and the HTSI website. You will be able to find further funding guidance on both websites, as well as a guide as well that can guide you through the funding application. You can apply for funding through both the Hub and or HTSI. So funding is per project and not per organisation. So please ensure if you're applying to both organisations that your project aligns with the themes, and please outline this in your application. There is a space in the funding application form for you to upload your verified accounts with your application, which you should provide. The funding application form from both organisations will close on the 30th of May at 4 p.m. and late submissions will not be accepted. Funding applications will be assessed via a panel with representatives from the Community Regeneration Fund, Local Action Group, the Hub and HTSI. Funding decisions will be made into June, with funding provided within 2 weeks of returning a signed grant agreement. So the panel will be looking for applications which are in line with the funding themes and are able to demonstrate this within your funding application. Previous experience of operating in Highland and previous experience of working with vulnerable people. You should be able to evidence community engagement, which has identified the need for the project you're applying for funding for. You should also be able to evidence community involvement in shaping the project delivery. Please provide clear outcomes for participants or your community as a whole for your project, and include the methods you'll use to measure the difference. Please also make sure before submitting your application that it's formatted well and it is easy to read and follow the story you are telling with your project and why it is needed. The funding panel will be reading through numerous funding applications, so you do want to make sure that you're clear on what you want to deliver. Please also make sure throughout your whole application that you're clear on the funding theme that you are applying for. Obviously, we do understand that your project may fit into several themes and you can emphasise this in your application, but please just select one theme at the beginning of your application. Again, please just ensure that your outcomes that you provide in your application are clear and measurable. Please demonstrate in your application that you align with the funding theme that you have selected. Projects will have to complete a final evaluation report after December 2025. The funding report will expect you to confirm the actual spend and the evidence of change against the outcomes that were stated in your application. So just moving on now to a little bit about the funding application form and how this is going to look. So this will be launching tomorrow. You can just see a little example of the funding application form on screen, and this is how it looks for both the Hub and HTSI. So for example, question 3 asks for the outcomes of the project that you are proposing. You are only limited to 4 outcomes so that the project doesn't become onerous or too much for you to deliver on in a 6-month period. So you may want to think carefully about the kind of outcomes that you wish to achieve. The second example shows the kind of financial detail that will be asked in the funding application form. Again, you are only limited to a certain number of items for your financial details, so please group all financial items such as staff and volunteer costs under headings. You should remove currency symbols and round all figures to whole numbers. Please include in your funding application form a breakdown of the total project costs, even if they won't be funded through the CLLD funding. So for example, if your project costs 40k as a whole, we would like to see how these costs are calculated, even though we would only be funding a portion of this. The panel will have to assess a project's viability, and providing a total breakdown of costs will help the panel to assess this. You'll be asked for your revenue and capital expenditure. So your revenue expenditure is your costs such as staff costs, room hire, travel, volunteer expenses. It can also include refreshments as well. Capital expenditure will usually cover costs associated with maintaining and upgrading physical assets such as community buildings, technology and equipment. They're generally kind of one-off costs, but they do contribute to the long-term value of your project. You will have to provide your income expenditure details for the 12-month period ending March 2024 for your whole organisation. Figures should be rounded up to the nearest whole number. You should also provide information for the financial period ending March 2024 if possible. This would normally be the same period as your latest verified accounts cover. If your accounts cover a different 12-month period, please complete the figures for that period, confirm the dates and explain. So that's really all about the funding at the moment. I'm just going to move on a little bit to kind of the membership of the Hub and our contact details, and then we'll open up to any questions that you might have. So just before we finish up again, and open for any questions, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the membership of the Highlands Islands Climate Hub. So we do offer membership to organisations, individuals and associate members. You don't have to be a climate-focused organisation to join us. Our goal is to encourage community-led climate action throughout the Highlands and Islands. We offer events, training, and we previously had a climate action fund up to £500 for new projects, which is currently closed at the moment, but this was exclusively for our members. We provide a collective voice to the Scottish Government and have a range of resources and a community of changemakers across the Highlands and Islands. So you can join us through the website, which should be in the chat as well, and there is a short application form for that. So if you want to contact us, you can do that through the email address funding@hiclimatehub.co.uk. If you have any questions about the CLLD funding after this session, we would pretty much urge you to contact us as soon as possible rather than later if you need any assistance with the funding application form, or if you just generally have any questions that you want to touch on about. Also, if you want to contact HTSI about the funding themes in their funding application form, you can contact them on funding@htsi.org.uk. So I think we'll finish up there and we will open for any questions if anybody has them. If you've got any questions, please just feel free to pop your hand up via Teams. And if we stop recording as well, please, Joe.